So we've talked about the types of big data source that we might use for our data in an Azure machine learning experiment. Let's take a look at how we can actually import that data into the experiment. So I've got here the Azure Storage Explorer tool, which is a useful tool for working, as its name suggests, with Azure Storage. And I can see in my subscription here, I've got the storage account that's actually used by my Azure Machine Learning workspace. Now, you don't have to use that storage account. You could use any storage account, really. But I've used that one. I've created a blob container called Big Data. And in that Big Data blob container, I've got a folder called Patients Output that contains some CSV files. So the idea here is that I've got some data that I collect from patients during the day. Perhaps I do blood tests and that type of thing. And then I store all that data. I process it using a big data batch processing job. So perhaps a USQL query or a Hive query or something overnight just to prepare it for analysis. And then I'm going to do some machine learning on it to try and figure out, based on the blood work and other tests I've done with these patients, whether they are likely to develop diabetes or not. So I've got some data here. I'll just open up one of these files so we can see what that looks like. I get a little security warning, that's okay. So we'll open up that CSV file in Excel in this case. And here's what the data that gets produced by my big data process looks like. It's basically just a bunch of columns. The first one I happen to know is the patient ID, and then the number of pregnancies for that patient, and so on. There's a whole bunch of different metrics along the top. Now you'll notice that there's no column headers in this. And that can be the case sometimes when you run a job using Hive, perhaps. It might generate the output, but it might not include column headers. So sometimes you'll have to deal with that when you're working with data that comes from a big data process. So I've got all these files stored in that blob container in my Azure Storage. How do I get that into my Azure Machine Learning experiment? Well, here we are in Azure Machine Learning Studio. So I'm just going to create a new experiment here. And I'll call this Big Data Diabetes. So we're going to go and get that data. And this time, instead of using one of these data sets that we've already uploaded, we're going to have to import the data from my Azure Storage account. So to do that, I can look in this data input and output, or I could just go and search. Either way would work. And that's going to let me get this import data module that I can bring in. Now, the import data module can be used to get data from a whole bunch of different sources. So you can see there's various different types of data source that I could select and use that to get data from. In this case, I'm going to get it from Azure Storage. And I could fill in all of these details. I could get all the details of my storage account name, the key, the pass key that's used to connect to the storage account to authenticate yourself, the path to the container, and so on. Or I could use this handy wizard to go and do that. So if I open up the wizard, the default option is actually Azure Blob Storage, which is exactly what we want to do. So we'll go and get that. The storage account, I'm going to use my storage account as the authentication. I could actually use a public or shared access token to connect to a blob URI, perhaps one that isn't in this subscription. But in this case, it's in my own subscription. I'm just going to go and select that there. The storage account itself is this AML012345 storage that I've got. And the account key is actually listed for me, so I don't have to go and look that up on the portal. I can just grab it from here. And then the path to the container that I want to get to, well, it's in the big data blob container, and within that, it is in a folder called Patients Output. Oh, yeah. And we can just go and test that connection. And that succeeded, so that looks pretty good. So we can go and tell the wizard what we need to do with the data. Now it's in comma-separated values format. It's a CSV, and it does not have a header row. So I'm not going to select that there. So we're just going to grab the CSV. There are various other formats we could use as well. So we're going to grab that CSV file, and we will go ahead and click the tick at the end. So it's filled in all of these details for me. Just going to go and grab from Big Data Patients Output. And notice I haven't specified the individual files. It's just going to grab all of the files in that folder and import those. So I could now go ahead and run that. So we'll just go and run the experiment. And when the experiment is run, I can go and have a look at the contents of this. Just visualize that. And I can see that it's brought back the data. However, of course, because I didn't have the column headers, it's just labeled them call 1, call 2, call 3. So it's brought back the data I need to work with. It's all there, but it hasn't got the column names. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add an edit metadata option to this. So we'll go and get our edit metadata module. And I'm going to use this to change the names of the columns. And to do that, I'm just going to launch the column selector, and I'm going to select all of the columns. These are the things that I'm going to rename, like that. And then in this new column names box here, I've actually just got them on the clipboard, so I'll just paste them in. But these are the columns. It's just a comma-delimited list of column names that I'm going to add to those columns. Now, I've obviously already imported that data using the import data module here, and we've already run the experiment once. What you can do that's quite useful, if you're going to be working with the same data again, is you can use cached results. So to save me going and continually reading the data from the data source, if I know it's not going to change while I'm experimenting with it, I can tell it to use the cached results, and it will use the results that are cached in my Azure Machine Learning workspace. So that can save a bit of performance overhead. However, you might want to occasionally take a look and just make sure you're meaning to use cache results. You might be wondering why you're not getting any new values appearing, and it's because it's not actually going and getting the data afresh. It's using the cached results. So we'll do that for this purpose, and we'll just go and run the experiment again. And it's very quickly ticked this one because it's obviously got the data cached, and then it runs the edit metadata. And if I go and take a look at that, I can now see that I've got my column headings along the top there.